This is Gemara Avodah Zarah Daf Lamid Tes. We're holding about 15 lines from the bottom of Lamed Ches base. Middle of the medium-sized lines. The first one line is Ki Man de Amar Noisin Tam Lefgam is Mutter. Continues the Gemara. We're in the middle discussing different foods cooked by Goyim. Amar Rav Sheshes HaMishcha Shlika Daramaya is going to be Aser. Boiled oil of the Armenians is Aser. Amar Rav Safra. If you're worried about mixing in Aser items, which is of course always is the dual concern. Concern number one, as we saw in the Tab Rashi number base, is that he's going to put in something davar tummy into it. So says Gemara, if that's a concern, then Misra Sari, the oil will be spoiled if you put in not kosher wine in it, and therefore there's no way he'll do it. As we saw, that one of the Tanaim, the conditions of Bishul Akum is that it can't be eaten, that if it's eaten raw, there's no problem with Bishul Akum. Says Gemara, this oil dish is eaten raw. And and if the concern is that it was made in the utensils of a guy, it's not a top problem either, and mutter. Says Gemara, there's no problem, it's going to be mutter. Hani ahini shaliki deramayamai. What is the halach of cooked dates of their Armenian? Chol yeloti ba'elacha. Sweet dates is no shaila. Tevada yisharu. Why they're mutter? Why? Because they're eating raw, and therefore there's no problem. Mirira, the bitter dates, loiti ba'elacha is not a shaila. Tevada yasira. What's the shaila? Kiti ba'elacha mitziyata. The middle type of dates. What's the halach? Amrlu. Ma'iti ba'elacha. The Rebbe is aser. Omani Levi. What does it mean? The Rabbi, and referring to Levi. Shetisa. What about the dish called Shetisa? Rav Shayavu Dishmav Levi Asri. B'chiti v'sairi. If it's Shetisa made of wheat and barley, kolam b'lik deshari. It's not going to be a machlekes. It's mut. But it's lavchi dechala. It's lentils with vinegar. Yum. Kulam l'bligi das. What's the machlekes? Keep ligi b'tiflecha demayo. Lentils with water. Marasav gazrin ha'atu. It's a gzeir d'Rabbanan that we make gzeir even of this dish made with water because of the dish made with vinegar. Marasavar loy gazrinan. Ikadam another lashon, 3 lines on the white lines. B'tavchaya demai, if it's made of water, come l'bligi, it's going to be us. What's the machlek? As kibli b'chit of his sairi, wheat and barley. Marasavar de gazrinan hatu. Marasavar loy gazrinan is no gezira. Amarav tari mine shetisa shadar barzilai galadi lidavi. This was the dish that Barzilai Galadi sent to David HaMelech, as we find in the pasuk, "Tislei mishchel safas v'kli yotzar chitim usayrim v'kemach v'koli upol adashim v'koli." So these two types of parched kernels in the pasuk, or the 2 different types of shetisa that you were talking about. V'hashtu to come mafki tzini l'shukat Narda. That you got basketfuls of this in the market of Narda. Less the chayish. La davua de Shmuel Levi, and we're not chayshish with the opinion of Shmuel Levi that is going to be a problem. Continues the Gemara. Now that we finish shlakais, now we go on to kavashim shedarkan lasis b'tochen yayin. We have items of a guy, preserved items that they normally put wine and vinegar into it. Amar chizka la yishanala shedarkan. That's the norm. Aval be yadua, then avada it's going to be aser. Afilu be'ana, as we've seen already, is the same halacha by yayin esach. Umay shina, asked the Gemara, murius. The shara rabbanan b'ana, murius is also a wine dish, yet it's mutter b'ana. Says Gemara, asam lavuri zuhuma, hachlam batuke taima. Why is the wine put in? Is it put in for tam, for taste? It's going to be aser b'ana. Whereas if it's just put in to remove the odors, then it will not. If Yechon Amar in the last line, I feel be it's going to be mutter ma'ishnami murius. The Rameir da aser behana. What's the chilek? As we turn over to Lamtasam and Aleph, Hasam Yadi mi mashu achala yadia mi mashan. The chilek is going to be whether the essence is going to be known, that even if the actual wine taste is not discernible, the wine puts in a taste, and therefore it's going to be aser. That's going to be the chilek between the 2 cases. And we continue on the second line in the next. If we have teresis that's cut up and brine that doesn't have fish, and the chilek, my chilek says, what are these different foods? Amar Avichana, Nachman Amar Baraba, Amarav Zu Solsanis, Umnema Asura, Neshavuna, Oila Ima. It's usher because it's a mixture of the non-kosher fish, something that's similar to it goes up with it from the water. Therefore, there's no way to discern whether you're eating is going to be the kosher one or the non-kosher variety. Tana Rabbanon, Ilay Akshav, Vasli Gadol Acherzman, fish that doesn't have fins and scales, but it's going to grow them. Kigoyin al sultanis, va'afis, different types of fish, arezem mutter. Yesh la'achshav aser lahashir. If there is fins and scales, but they're going to fall off. B'shash eliminat da'yam, when it comes out of the water, kigoyin akunis va'afunis, kitas patis uva'chaspatias, all different types of fish. Va'otinis, mutter. Then it'll be mutter. So depending on when the fins and scales are lost, will depend if this is a kosher type of fish or not. Says the word Echos of Avodah Kesari, Avodah announced in Kesari, Kervi Dagim V'Ovrin Nikachin Mikol Adam, the fatty inside of the fish and the eggs you could buy from anyone. Chaskasan in Aban Elam Pilusa Vaspamia, because we know it comes from the Pilusa and Aspamia fish, which are not commonly found. Kihad Amar Abaya Haisach Nasa Devav Nara is going to be mutter. The sachnasa, which is a chilik from Bavlahara, is mutter. Why? Because in that river, there's no non-kosher fish at all. Says the Gemara, where does this come from? My time. If the reason is because the water of the river is so strong, and therefore the other type of fish can't live there. And the non-kosher fish, even the less shidra, the non-kosher fish doesn't have a spine, and the water is rushing. But you can't live with the rushing waters. But lemaisa, we don't think it works scientifically, but we see that this fish could survive the currents. Says the Gemara, so you know why? The water is very salty. By the Tami came to let's say kilfi b'dochta the malicha maya loy matzi kai, and therefore, since there's no scales to protect it from all the salt water, therefore loy matzi kai, you can't live over there. The same kasha chazina the kai. We see that the fish lives. Al misham de la marba tina dog tame. Says we know what the reason is because this river. The salt, the tina, the silt on the fish on the river bed doesn't allow these non-kosher fish to live, and that's the reason why if the fish comes from there, you know it's going to be of the kosher variety. Ravina inna the koshavchi bein haraguzav and hargamda asiri. But nowadays, that this Bav River is not an isolated river. Two other rivers flow into the Guza River, the Gamda River, and therefore any fish that came from there is lamaisa going to be usher because other fish are mixed with it. Continues the Gemara discussing other types of fish. Amar Abaya chamra diyama is shari, patura diyama is usher. Simanach tamei tar is tamei. Amar Avashi shfarnuna shari kedash nuna is usher. Shfarnuna fish is usher. Kadesh nura is mutar. Kadesh nura is usher. Simanach kadesh Hashem. Igedami kvarnuna is usher. Simanach kivrei akum. Again, different types of fish. You have to know how to apply it. Lemaisa. Continues the Gemara. How do we figure out different fish? Rav Akiva, 3 lines from the medium-sized lines. Ikla leginezik. Nuna. They brought to him a certain fish that was similar to a non-kosher fish. He covered the fish with a basket, and it caused the skin to rub against the side of the basket. And chazube kalfi. Therefore, he was able to see that there were scales lemais on this fish, and therefore visharye, he said the fish is mutter. Another story, Rav Ashi ikla litam duraya, on the first medium-sized line. Aiselikamayu ahu nuna, they brought in front of him a nuna fish, tavidem l'shafar nuna, that was similar to shafar nuna, which is a mutter type of fish. Davidami, excuse me, one more time. Aiselikamayu nuna, davidami lisluvcha. Similar to a slovcha, which is an eel, a non-kosher fish, he held it against the sun. But he saw it had scales, and Visharya, he said it was mutter. Story number 3 of Ashi. They brought in front of him Nuna, similar to Shar Nuna, which is a mutter fish. He covered it with a white bowl, and he saw that it has scales. And he said it is mutter. So all different ways to tell are there lamaisa the simanim of kashrus. And one last story, Rabbi Chana Akra. Rabbi Chana went to a place called Akra Da'agma Krivale Sachanta. They brought him Sachanta fish, which is a kosher type of fish. He heard a person who called it bati, which is a non-kosher fish. Now he doesn't know, is this kosher or non-kosher fish? Amar, so he said, since he called it bati, you don't want to eat it. The safra, but in the morning, he looked into the fish, and he saw the maisa wasn't kosher. And he was so excited. He called upon him that on a tzaddik no evil will befall. Continues the Gemara. A grain of chelsis, the Mishnah said is aser. My time, what is the reason? Because the guy would cut it with a not kosher knife. Is mutter. So why would this be aser? Agav chorfi dechaltita machli leishamnunita. Says the Gemara, Merdika Chedesh, an incredible yisoid in kashrus, that the sharpness causes mechalia leisham nenisa. It causes the non-kosher fat to be sweet. And it's going to be ulcer. So anytime there's a davar mar, anytime there's a davar charif, that has the ability to make something, even a natlab, nistan lefkam, has an ability to make it nisin tam lishvach. Avdi de Rav Levi have come azin chilta. The servants of Rav Levi would sell chilsas. Kilchon shed Rav Levi. Rav Levi was neftar. Are we led to buy from him after Rav Levi was neftar? Amrlu Rav Yechlan said, "Avdi shel chaver hareu k'chaver." The avid of a chaver is like the chaver. Therefore, you could assume that the avodim will do the same process, even when the master is no longer alive. Therefore, you could buy it from him. Continues the Gemara. Ravuna bar Binyamin zaven techilta. Ravuna bar Zavuni bought techeles, mentioned the Vesi to Rav Amr Chasida from the wife of Rav Amr Chasida. Also, like Rav Yosef, Rav Yosef did not know what is the story if he was able to use these techeles. So what happened? Chanan Chayata, the tailor, met Ravuna bar Binyamin and Amr Lei. He said to him, Yosef, Anya Minale. Where would Yosef the Ani have an answer to this? B'didi Avayov, I'll tell you a story. Dizavina techelta mi anshe. Tevesi the Ravana Achud Rav Chia Barabba. I bought cheles, a similar ma'isa from the wife of Ravana, the brother of Chia Barabba. Of Aisa lekamei the Rav Masna, and I came from Rav Masna. And I had a similar shaila. I let her use it laviyad, and Rav Masna didn't know. Aisa lekamei Rav Yehuda. The train continues. Ma'agrun yamrle nafaltel yad. And he says, you fell into my hand. The lashon meaning, I understand. They have the psak, kachi amar shmuel, 3 lines from the wide lines. Eishes chaver, harehi kechaver. Therefore, she has an amanis like her husband, and therefore you could trust that they're selling tcheles, which is real, and you're able to use the tcheles. Continues the Gemara, another story, Tanina laha, or the Tanur Rabbanan, Eishes chaver, harehi kechaver, avder shel chaver, kechaver. Chaver shemeis, they have a chazaka until when? Till they become a chasha suspected. A chasha that sells the cheles, you have the chazaka until it becomes pasal. Continues the Gemara. Tanu Rabba, none of the first one line. Excuse me. Eishes amaretz sheniseis l'chaver. So if the wife of an amaretz that then goes and marries a chaver. V'chein bita shel amaretz sheniseis l'chaver. V'chein avdo shel amaretz shenimker l'chaver. Kulan tzrichon lekabel divrei chaveros. They have to accept all the rules of a chaver of a talmid chacham before they could be relied upon. However, what about fakert? They do not have to accept the chaveros once they are reliable. They do not lose that ne'amanos divrei hameir lechatchila divrei hameir. But Rav Yehuda Amarvin zich lekabel divrei chaveros lechatchila. No, they do have to be doing such in order to be considered reliable. V'chein hayir Rav Shimon bar Elazar Amar Ma'isa be'ishes bisha achas shenisis l'chaver v'isa kaisharis letfilin. There was this woman who was married to chaver, again a chaver being a talmid chacham, and she would put tefillin al yada in his hand. This is the moiches, and then she became married to a tax collector. Al yada, she would tie the receipts of the tax collector on his hand, as we see over here, which would prove that they paid the taxes. So says the Gemara, we see that even though prior she was married to chaver, then what we see that even though when she was married to Chaver, she had the status of a Chaver, we see right away she assumes the status of her husband, even if it's not such a favorable status. Amar Rav, on the last line, Chaviyat Aser b'chaisem echad, but Champag Mutter b'chaisem echad. Now, what is Chaviyat? What is Champag? Says the Gemara, Cholav, Basar, Yayin, Tcheles, those four entities. Asurim b'chaisem echad, as we turn over Lametesam and Beis, those four entities are asur with one chaisem. But chelsin muria is pas kevina mutarim b'chaisem echad, they are mutter with one chaisem. Now, why is this true? Says I don't understand. Pas l'mayim nechashol. What are you worried about pas? If you're worried that they're going to exchange it, you're going to know that you exchange cold bread for warm bread. If you change wheat for barley, says the Gemara, even though the same, no one would forge it. And that's why one seal will work. Virav, why does he say not? A second reason, it's not enough of a making money to be mezuyif. Amar Rav Kahana, apek chalav, says Rav Kahana, I'll remove chalav, I'll chatik dog shein by simin. Says Gemara, what do you mean? I knew basar. That's the same thing as basar. Says the Gemara, Tregav the basar. You're right. Two different types of basar. Shmuel Amar, base asar b'chaisem echad, base yutaf, and machag is but b'chaisem echad. What's that? It's basar. Yain techilas asar b'chaisem echad. Morius chelsos kavina mutarim b'chaisem echad. Says the Gemara. The Gemara now explains the Shmuel chatichas dog she'ein basimin. I knew basar. Tregav the basar. Layam reading. He doesn't hold this. You say that we want to say two different types of basar. Tanu Rabbanon, says the Gemara, in Lechin Yamach Machag bis in Lechin Yamach Machag b'Surya. Explains the Gemara. 1 second. Lo yayin v'lemeris l'chalav v'lemelech sol kondanis l'chiltas l'gevina. Ella, what does it mean? What does it mean? Ein Lechin? Ein Lechin stam? No, it means Ein Lechin elu min hamumcha v'kulon. But all them in Yisrael Chetza Balabayis Mutter, Mesele Rav Shua ben Levi, Rav Shua ben Levi, Shagar loy balabayis lebeisai mutter, my time of balabayis loy shaviket teira, vachli surah v'chimach klei mimay da'achel mishader lei. And now we continue and we quote the last of all the Yisurim that we learned to the Mishnah, 2 lines from the white, 3 lines from the white lines. Umelech sakaldanis halkaldanis salt. Says the Gemara, what is this melech sandunis? My melech salkadunis. I'm Rabbi Yehuda Shmuel melech shekol salkanduni roimi. Eichlin Isa, and salt that all the bakers of Romans eat. What is this? On a Rabban on the first white line. The black one is also, the white one is mutar. Rav Meir bar Rav Yehuda says, no, levana also shchayra mutaris. So Rav Yehuda ben Gamliel, Misham Rav Chanina ben Gamliel, I'm Rav Zuv asura. So either it's black or white or all are asur. Amar Rav Chanan, Rav Yechon, the divrei oimer levina asura. The one who says that the white one is Aser, but what's the reason? Because we're worried that pieces of fish, of white fish, which is not kosher, are mixed with it. Why? What would the reason they're both be Aser? Excuse me, because we're worried about both of them. There was one elderly baker that what would he do? Avodah Zarah, that he would coat the surface of the salt with lard, and that's the reason why it would be aser. And finally, Areilu Asurim, the Mishnah concluded that all these items are aser b'hanal. What's this last I come to exclude? The chizkel muti biyadua. According to Chizkiah, exclude foods which is known, biyadua, that wine was added. Then even according to Chizkiah, it would be aser b'hanal. Rav Yochanan argues, and excludes Murius and Chiza Besukaini, and the Stam Mishnah is like Rameir, that both of them are Atzar Ba'ana. We'll pick it up for the new Mishnah on the next year, B'siyata Dishmaya.